April Dawn Andrews was a 15-year-old from Pea Ridge, Arkansas. She was a shy girl who had many siblings. On Saturday, November 18th, 2006, April and her family had taken a trip to a store. When they got back, April decided to walk to a local church that was having a clothing drive. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Since I'm now middle-aged, and I'm going to be turning 50 this year, I think I can say that most adults long to get something from their youth back. Maybe it's their looks. Maybe the chance to make different choices the second time around. Maybe it would be the opportunity to actually take all those naps and go to bed early like our parents wanted, instead of fighting them like we all did. I mean, really. What were we thinking? Or maybe it would be the chance to see everything as new again, to not know what's out there in the world, to not be so jaded about the future and the prospect of confronting our own deaths, to not know about war and poverty and abuse and trolls and, yes, disappearances. Because there is nothing more heartwarming and revealing and, dare I say it, funny, than a kid's unfiltered, honest, and ironic view of how everything works. For adults to do it, well, comedians are the only ones that come close. Well, April Andrews was a girl who viewed the world much like I've mentioned here, with innocence, but maybe even more so due to her learning disability. Then she was gone. And the only witness connected to April's case is a little girl like April. And we adults are left to wonder what she saw through a child's eyes. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, CHARLEPROJECT.org. April Andrews had a tough life. Her family was poor, and her mother had to rely on public assistance to feed April and her siblings. April had a learning disability that made her the brunt of bullying at school. Her mother didn't have a car, and at times they were homeless. Yet April still looked up to her mother, and the family was fortunate that others would open their homes to them once in a while. However, at the time of April's disappearance, the family was living on their own in an apartment. So on Saturday, November 18th, 2006, April, her mother, and the other children went for a walk to the store. Then they came home. It was at this time that April requested she be allowed to go back to a church they had passed on the way back. The church was giving out clothing to poor people, and April had the idea of maybe getting a few items. The walk was about a mile, and April's mother allowed her to go. April was then allegedly seen by an 8-year-old from another apartment, talking to a man in a brown pickup truck. She was never seen again. If you watch the live show on YouTube on Wednesday nights, you know I talk about how I have an aversion to covering the disappearances of children. April's case is a perfect illustration of this, because these questions remain. Number 1, why did April's mother keep April's disappearance a secret from all other family members for a year? Number 2, why were there no Amber Alerts or any media attention at the time of April's disappearance? And number 3, is it a coincidence that a person connected to the kids bullying April drove a brown pickup truck at the time? April's mother has never publicly voiced an opinion on what happened to her daughter. However, other family members reject the idea that April ran off on her own, a belief police had at the time in 2006. The guest for this episode is April's half-sister, Tanya Washburn. Unfound news. I now have a tentative date for a speaking engagement I'll have at Northwestern State University in, boy, I hope I get this right, Natchitoches, Louisiana. It will be April 2nd, once again tentatively, unless there are changes. I'll be speaking to 2 1-hour and 15-minute classes about what I've learned and my experiences regarding missing persons cases. I know I'm going to be a bit nervous, but I'm going to be so pumped up at the same time. And I can't thank them enough for the opportunity. While I'm at it, please don't forget what I mentioned last week. April 9th, on the Nova Southeastern University Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice Facebook page, I'll be doing an on-site interview with Dr. Grace Telesco. Very excited for that as well. Next, the Unfound website, which has not been mentioned in quite a long time on these episodes. It's on its way back from oblivion. I hadn't talked about it because it was getting ignored due to me not having enough time to work on it. Plus, I'm not exactly a website expert. However, Natasha, yep, you've heard me mention her before, is now in charge of it. We now have a new website address, a new look to it, etc. However, still not ready to go public with it, but very soon. Finally, yes, I need to start devoting more time to getting back to the books and the playing cards. Thank you to one of my former guests who asked me about them. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on the Unfound podcast channel on YouTube for the Unfound live show. All of you can speak with me, and I can answer your questions. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound podcast. This week, I need to thank Lisa and Craig. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise. The books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Because you are psychic, you know what I'm going to say next. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com/sell/unfound podcast. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the half-sister of April Andrews, Tanya Washburn. Tanya, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here. You are April's half-sister. Maybe we first need to explain that to the listeners. So how are you and she related?
We have the same father. Different moms. Her mom did help raise me, but we do have the same father.
Okay. And how close are you to in age? Of course, keeping in mind that she disappeared back in 2006 when she was 15, but how close are you two in age?
I believe I was 17 years older than her.
Wow, 17 years. Wow, okay.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a span. That's like the difference between my age and my older brother Brian, so I'm a little bit familiar with that. So you, of course, being 17 years older, you remember when she was born then?
Yes.
Okay.
Very excited.
You were excited, okay. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that. So you both have the same father, and how long, if you know, or you can take a guess, how long was your father with April's mother before she was born? Do you remember how that all happened?
So they were together 17 years. So I'm gonna say April was around 3 or 4 when they divorced.
Okay. So your father was with your mother, and then their relationship broke up, and then he went with, we should say that April's mother's name is Tina, correct?
Correct.
And so he was with Tina, and April was born, and then that relationship broke up as well. Okay. What kind of relationship would you say you had with April? Of course, 17 years older. I mean, you probably can't have much of a relationship with her for a few years, but let's say when she got to be 6, 7, or 8 years old, I mean, you would have been in your mid-20s. Did you see her?
Right.
Did you talk to her or at all, or what was it like?
Well, when she divorced my father, Tina went to go live and marry another man, so I really didn't get to see her as often as I wanted to. But I would say April was more like a niece to me than she was like a sister to me.
Sure. That would make sense. Sure. Of course, because she's not your full biological sister, and of course the age difference.
Right. My kids are actually the same age as her.
Wow. Okay. And so did you see a lot of her? I mean, back then, let's just, when she was in her, 8, 9, did you see a lot of her? Or was that a little bit weird being that you both had different mothers? Was it weird or wasn't it?
Well, actually, her mother was the only one I really knew because my mother has always been out of the picture.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, I saw as much of her as I could until she moved away to go live with her new stepdad.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So let's talk about April a little bit. How did you get to know her? Of course, we should keep in mind that she did have a learning disability that could factor into this disappearance. Of course, we'll talk about that eventually. But what do you remember about her personality and everything else?
She was always real shy. I remember at one point, her mom found them all. They were all homeless. She eventually divorced her new husband, and they became homeless. So she came to live with us. And the whole time she lived with us, April was so shy. Wow. Wasn't really outgoing. Always wanted to be by her mom's side.
Okay. And you said that she lived with you for a while?
Yes, for just a few months.
Okay. And how was that? How did that go?
It was stressful because I had me and my 4 kids and my husband at the time, and then it was my stepmom and 4 of her kids. So it got stressful at times.
That's like the Brady Bunch. Even bigger than the Brady Bunch. Oh my gosh. And approximately at what time was this? And maybe what year was that happened?
I'm going to say around 2004.
Okay, so just a couple years before April
she went missing.
Disappeared. Okay. So they lived with you, and what happened after? Did they find their own place, or what?
While Tina was still married to her second husband, Albert, April got into a real bad accident, and she got rewarded some money. Well, we were able to get that money for Tina so that she could start over and get her own place. And she got her own place and started over. And eventually they moved to Rogers after that.
Okay. What was this accident that happened to April?
April was riding her bike in the road, and her neighbor didn't see her and hit her with the car and dragged her down the road.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Did she fully recover for that, or did she?
Yes.
She did?
As far as I know, she did, yes.
Okay. Wow. Well, kids riding bikes, some of them do get hit. I'm just, of course, glad that she was able to fully recover from that. And we should also maybe mention, being that you are a half-sister, you already mentioned that Tina had some other children. How many other children did she have along with April that were kind of with her, in contrast to you maybe, being brought up, by different adults? How many children did she have that she cared for?
She had 6 children of her own.
Wow. Okay.
Including April. And then she had me and my 2 older brothers. At one time, we were all living together.
Okay.
And that's when, April was, like I said, she was still a baby.
Yeah.
And I was 16 actually when she was born, because I had a 1-year-old child at that time.
Okay. All right, so when they moved out after living with you in 2004, what we're saying is Tina moved out with April, and then there were other children.
No, April was, there was 2 other children after April, but they were all born while my dad and her were still married.
Okay. All right. All right, a lot of kids. All right, a lot of kids.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm glad we're not going to get through all the names and everything else. I'm just trying to make sure that the listeners understand that it wasn't just you and April. There were multiple children. Multiple.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, what kind of schooling situation was April in? Was she like in special education classes or what?
Yes, she was in special education classes in Pea Ridge, and from what I've been told, because she was in special education classes, she was being bullied for that.
Oh my. Okay. Well, that happens. It's unfortunate, but we know that it happens. Okay. Do you know if she talked to people about it? I mean, how would people know about it? Did she go to somebody like a teacher or something regarding this? How did you find out?
I found out through news articles that was posted online, and I believe it was a counselor she talked to. She spoke with.
Okay. So these were articles after she disappeared?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right, so April, they were with you for a while, and then they get their own place sometime in, let's say, late 2004. She disappears in 2006. How do you think that time was, them all living then, together in a new place, the, year and a half or 2 years, whatever it was? How was it, the way you remember it?
I think from the few times that I would get to visit with them, it was rough for them because there was I only remember one time that they were really, truly happy when I visited them, and that was right before her disappearance. She was so excited because she had just got her first own bedroom all to herself, and she wanted to show it to me. Wow. The other times, I really think they just really struggled to even put food on the table.
Oh, my. Yeah. I'm guessing there was some sort of government assistance going on, or was Tina also working? What was the situation?
No, Tina was not working. I don't believe she has worked since like 1998. Wow. There was government assistance. She was on the SNAP program, and she was also on. She had 4 children in the home, and all 4 of them got either a disability check on themselves or a survivor's benefit check from my dad.
And the reason was because some of her other children also had disabilities?
Right.
Besides April. Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right. Yes, sounds like a very, very difficult situation going on there. Wow. Okay. Let's talk about April and her learning disability. How would you are a mother. How bad was it? How behind was she? 15 years old. What was her intelligence, what year or grade level would you say that it was? How would you explain it?
I as a mother and as my opinion, because I don't know, I didn't see the school records, and I don't know what the school records said, but as my opinion, I really thought that at 15 she was had the intelligence of a 10-year-old.
Okay. All right, and then of course goes along with her shynesses too. So it's like maybe even a little bit compounded. Okay, would you say that if somebody didn't know, let me put it this way. If somebody were to just meet April for the first time, would they automatically realize that maybe she was mentally disabled or was a slow learner? Or was that something that people wouldn't realize maybe until they saw her schooling or something like that? How would you explain it?
I think once they spent a little bit of time with her, they would realize it. I don't think they would know it just having a conversation, like "Hi, how are you doing?" kind of conversation. But once they start asking like questions, like "Where do you live?" Stuff like that, I don't think April could have told you her address. Okay. So I think they would have probably guessed by then. At that point, yeah, she's there's something wrong.
Okay. All right. And let's just talk about, being that Tina did have so many children, but April was not the oldest one living in the house. Did she have an older son that was like 19 or something?
Elijah. She had Elijah still living in the home.
Okay. Okay. And how would you explain, once again, what you saw, not what people told you, but what you saw between Tina and April? How would you explain their relationship?
I always thought they were close. I always truly believed that April worshipped the ground that her mother walked on. I don't think her mother always had the best interest at April at heart. But as far as the way April looked at her mom, she thought she worshipped the ground she walked on. How her mom looked at her, you couldn't tell because she showed no emotions.
Okay, so Tina, maybe the word cold is a word you might use to explain Tina? Cold?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. From what you saw, would you say that, once again, what you saw, would you say that Tina was maybe closer to some of her other kids, or what?
I believe she was closer to Elijah than she was the other ones.
Okay. All right. But did Tina make sure, were there any schooling issues? I mean, was Tina making sure that April went to school, or they all went to school? And
no, she did not. She did not.
Okay. So maybe I'll put it this way: did she kind of just leave, the kids up to their own devices, on a daily basis?
Exactly. She had one son that did not go to school so much that he ended up going into foster care.
Okay. All right. So this is, but still, you think that April worshipped the ground that Tina walked on, and maybe that's not so unusual. A lot of children feel that way about their parents, even if their parents are imperfect. April has this learning disability, which I'm sure made it difficult, for schooling. And then you brought up the bullying that was mentioned in some articles after her disappearance, but we're not sure about it. If anybody knew about that publicly beforehand, and then you have all these other kids, other children in the home as well. How close did you live to where April and Tina and those other children were living at the time of the disappearance? How far away were you?
I believe it was about, I want to say it's about 20 miles, maybe 30 miles. At the time she went missing, I lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Fayetteville, okay.
And she lived in Pea Ridge, so that's like five towns away from me.
Okay. I'm not sure how long a town is. Okay. Let's say to drive it. Would you say half hour? Would you say hour, 45 minutes?
It would take about an hour. It would take about an hour to get there.
Okay, an hour. Okay. And how often would you go over to see them? How often would you talk to Tina, if you talked to her at all? How often would you, once again, in maybe the months before April disappeared, how much interaction were you having with them?
I would go up there I would say about once every 6 months.
Okay, just to hang out, see what was going on, and hang out with some other family members.
No, just to see them, just to make sure they were okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And when was the last time that you spoke to April, even if it was on the phone, before she disappeared?
I cannot recall the last time I talked to her before she disappeared. According to them, though, from what the police have told me, I was apparently there the day of April's disappearance. I don't recall ever being there that day.
Huh. Do you, all right, well, what do you think of that? Does that, when you were first told that, and we'll get into how you found out about April going missing, which adds to maybe the confusion in this area. But did that surprise you when you were told that you were there that day, or not? Or how did you feel about that?
I don't believe it because they told the police that I loaned them $20 that day, and as a single mom with 4 kids, I didn't have 2 pennies to scrap together, so there's no way I would have loaned her $20.
Okay. All right, that's very interesting, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Once again, as to the reason for this confusion. Okay. In the days and weeks before April disappeared, and this could be anything that you found out since. Of course, you've already talked about the bullying, but was there any other things, unique things going on in April's life? Any new problems? Did she ever talk to anybody about running away? Anything like that? Anything that was a little different in those weeks before that was different than, of course, maybe the year before that you found out?
Well, now, I was contacted by one of her friends that she used to hang out with, and she said that another one of their friends that was kind of like the ringleader of the pack was trying to get April to do, like, go out in the middle of the night and go party and stuff like that.
Huh.
As much as that was true, I don't know, because I wasn't there. I didn't see that side of April, the kind of April that would want to sneak out and just take off like that.
Right. I agree with you, especially at 15 years old. Of course, we would never mention any children's names regarding any of this, but do you understand this to be one of her April's classmates or somebody in the neighborhood? What is your understanding regarding this?
The ringleader that was supposed to have been the ringleader of the pack was quite a few years older than April, from my understanding.
Okay. But then I'm guessing this is, if April's 15, maybe this person could be 19 or 20? That old or older?
Yeah, yes, possibly.
Okay, somebody in the neighborhood then that knew April.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you got to wonder about that. Of course, if April had a mother who, wasn't keeping an eye on her going, to school and everything, then I guess it is possible that April might sneak out in the middle of the night. And, maybe with a learning disability, she might not totally understand the consequences of doing that, possibly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it could be some older, do you understand this ringleader to be a girl or a boy?
It was a girl.
It was a girl.
It was a girl.
Okay. Okay, so we have that. But any proof of that, or is that just something you heard?
No proof of that. Like I said, that's just what this other little girl told me.
Okay.
I do know that her mother is now living with the ringleader's family. She's been living there for quite a few years now.
Okay. Well, all right. All right. So we have that. So maybe that's something. The bullying. April maybe was sneaking out at night, but many teenagers. I never did because I lived out in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't have any place to go. But maybe kids that grow up maybe in neighborhoods and things maybe are more inclined to do that. So maybe that's not unusual. But of course, in April's case, she went missing. Okay. To your knowledge, April ever talk about running away on her own? I mean, because of her home life or any other reason? As many teenagers talk about running away.
No, to my knowledge, she's never thought of that.
Okay. All right. So what is the story? Let's just move up. So we got the days and weeks before, and let's just move up to the day that is accepted as the day of her disappearance, November 18th, 2006, which roughly a week before Thanksgiving. Do you know if Tina and her kids had any plans for Thanksgiving? Were possibly, for example, you going to get together with them and celebrate together? Any idea?
As far as I know, no, they didn't have any plans. They usually, growing up, we just always had a dinner there at the house. We never went anywhere. And, I could be completely wrong. She might have had plans, but as far as I know, she didn't.
Okay. All right, so November 18th, 2006. I've checked this. This was a Saturday. So this was not a day where if April was going to school or choosing to go to school, this was not a day where she would have been expected to be there. So what is the story for that day? And we just have to keep in mind this is what you've learned after. Of course, you were not there in Pea Ridge that day, but this is what you found out. What is the on-the-record story for that day regarding April?
So the story is that April and her mom and her brothers were walking back from the store, and they had seen a sign where a local church was giving away free clothing. So they get back to the house, and April decides that she's going to go to the church by herself and see if she can get some free clothes. And April never returned.
Huh. Okay, so was this a church? Just some questions, once again, just to the best of your knowledge. Was this a church? Were they a member of this church, or did it just happen to be on their way home?
They were not a member of the church. It just was a church on their way home.
Okay. So how far was this church away from where they lived?
I think they said it was like a mile from the house.
A mile. Not close, not far. Of course, you're walking. You know, average person walks maybe a little under 3 miles an hour, so it's like a 20-minute walk.
Yes.
Something like that, you know. And then, of course, they were, you know, smaller kids, so that must have been a walk for Tina and April and the rest of the kids to go wherever they were going, and then they came back, and then April decided that she wanted to go back down there. Okay. Anybody see her walking by herself? Anybody see her at this church? Anything like anybody in the neighborhood see her walking? Anything?
So, from the reports, it says that a 8-year-old girl saw April talking to a man in a tan pickup truck. But as far as the church, I believe they said that the church was not having a church drive that day, so nobody saw her that day.
All right, so Tina is saying one thing, but the church itself is saying something different?
Right.
Okay. Are we sure there isn't some misunderstanding as to what church it is?
I'm not sure. They've always been very adamant about it being this, I think it was Church of Naz. I'm not for sure the name of the church.
Okay.
And just right down the street, and they've always been adamant about it being the same church.
Okay. Do you know if it was common for April and her mother and the kids to go walking out on a Saturday? And I mean, let's put it this way: did anybody see them when they went walking that day together? The group of them, where they went to the store, wherever they went, did anybody see all of them together that day?
Not that I'm aware of.
Wow. Okay.
But it's not uncommon for them to walk because they did not have a vehicle. Their mother did not drive. She had no license, no car, so they walked everywhere they went.
Okay. So that wouldn't have been strange. It's just that after 14 years, to your knowledge, nobody has ever come forward to say, you know, I saw Tina and April and the kids earlier that day.
Right.
Okay. All right, so they get home, allegedly, and then April wants to go back down to this church. Allegedly, they were, you know, church do have clothing drives, and they do, of course, we know that all denominations of religions do have, you know, give clothes to poor people or disadvantaged people. So that's not crazy at all. Approximately what time of the day was this?
I don't know what time of the day she left to go down there. I want to say it was like around 2 or 3, and then they did not report her missing till like 8 or 9 that night.
Okay, well, let's just talk about that. So she goes down there. Maybe her mother gives her an hour. You know, maybe she left at 2:30. April gets down there around 3. Maybe her mother's expecting her to be back by 4, let's say. And so she doesn't come home, and then what does April's mother do?
I'm not sure. All I know is that she did not report her missing until 8 or 9 that night. I would suspect that she might have sent one of her boys down there to see if they could find April.
That makes sense.
That's
sure.
knowledge, that didn't happen.
Okay. And do you know if she, or maybe once again she had Elijah, an older brother, and he was what, 19 at the time?
Elijah would not have went. He is worse off than April.
Okay.
So she would have sent Truman or Jubal, one of her younger brothers, down to find her.
Okay. All right. Do you know if Tina or any of these children tried to call the church to see if?
Nothing.
You don't know about that?
No.
Okay. All right. So, but later that evening, Tina does call the police. And what do you know about what the police did?
So the police listed her as a missing runaway or an endangered runaway.
Okay.
And she was listed as an endangered runaway for quite a few years. And there was a female officer that was investigating April's case, but unfortunately, a year after April went missing, she also went missing.
Right. We're going to talk about that too, which is a strange twist in all of this. Okay, so she did file a police report. The police took it seriously. Of course, she was considered a runaway. Any searches done that evening? Any searches done the next day? Of course, which would have been a Sunday, church day. Any searches come together through the streets? Anything like that?
As far as I know, there was no searches. I do know that her mother posted flyers, missing person flyers, up around the town. But according to them, the flyers were removed the next day.
Okay, well, and I know, as unusual as that might sound, we seem to get a lot of that in disappearances. I don't know what that is. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but we seem to get that a lot about posters being put up and then getting taken down. And I can think of a few of those disappearances right off the top of my head. Not sure what to think of that, but that's what she says she did. And so she had these flyers up. Pea Ridge, how big of a town is this? How would you explain it?
Oh my goodness, it's so small you can blink and drive through it.
Okay. How many, maybe put it this way, how many stoplights are there?
I think there was only one the last time I was there. Now, I have not been there in quite a few years.
All right, so pretty small. Pretty small. Okay. So, what would you say? Maybe I grew up in a town of 2,500 people, had 2 stoplights, so maybe smaller than that. So, not a lot of places that April could disappear to if she was going off on her.
It was kind of in a remote area, so if she was going to run away to another town, she would have been walking for hours.
Yeah. Did the groups get together? Did they, go house to house? Any volunteer groups get together?
No, there was no searches to my knowledge.
To your knowledge. Okay. All right, and once again, your understanding the next few weeks, let's say, or month, of course, we go past Thanksgiving, we get into December, we're getting close to Christmas. Do you know what Tina and, the kids did? Did they do it? Were there any news articles that came out early on? And how hard do you think the police really worked this disappearance?
The only news article that came out was like after the first initial disappearance. And then as far as looking for her or doing anything like that afterwards, they didn't know. The police didn't follow through with it. And it wasn't taken seriously until it got turned over to the Benton County Sheriff's Department, and that's when it started getting serious. And they then turned it from an endangered runaway to a missing person.
And when did that happen?
I'm going to say it was probably 3 years after April went missing that she was then turned into a missing person.
And if you could say that again, why was it eventually shifted from one department to another?
I believe it got shifted because the original officer that was on the case went missing. So those files then went to Dayton County.
Okay, so what you're saying is there wasn't another investigator detective officer who took over it in the same department. They just decided to give it to some other department to
my knowledge, yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and you just to your knowledge, and that's all we can talk about, and I appreciate that. Okay. So she goes missing. Would you say that Tina and her kids showed a lot of pain regarding this, the way you understand it? Once again, we'll get into how you were connected to all this and how you found out in a bit, but the way you understand it, would you say that they got back to home life is normal, or what?
Yeah, home life is normal. I think Jubal, the youngest child, he really took it hard. You could see the pain in his eyes in the one photo that I seen of him. I think he took it really hard. But as far as getting back to life, I think Tina just chalked it up as to, April doing something that her herself did at 15, and that was run away.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to what we would call the rest of the case, and we certainly have to start here. Now, you have to remember, you are a family member. You would go up and see them once every 6 months. You and April share the same father, etc. When did you find out that April was missing?
It wasn't for a year later.
A year?
It was a year after April went missing that I found out, and It was from a news article on TV.
Okay, we got to go through this. So you're saying like November 2007, roughly?
Right.
Okay. So what would happen if you were keeping in contact with them when you would call up to Tina's, let's say sometime in early 2007 or whenever, and April you couldn't talk to April, or what would they say?
Okay, so Tina never had a phone, so the only way I could talk to them was to go up there.
Okay.
So it was probably a year after April went missing that I went up there, and that was because I heard about it, and she just didn't have no emotion. She shrugged her shoulders and like, yeah, it is what it is.
So she never made any effort in that year. Once again, I know not having a phone, but not even a letter or anything else, did it ever get back to you that April was missing?
Never did she try to contact me or any of the other family. Okay. She kept it in her house.
Okay. You had to be stunned. You had to be absolutely stunned when you found out about that. Did you give Tina a hard time because of it, or what?
No, because we didn't have a good relationship as it was, I just kind of left it, and that's when I contacted the police department. Of course, they couldn't say anything to me because they didn't have any new information, and that's when I kind of got involved, and I started contacting people to try to find out what I could do to help.
Okay. Over that year, like you said, just to be clear about this, Tina just kept this, the disappearance of April, I guess you would say, in-house. Forgive the pun.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you found out from a news article. Did you read it, or was that on TV?
I believe somebody called me and told me about it, and then I looked it up and read it.
You had to have thought it was some sort of joke or something, right? You didn't.
I did. I thought they were crazy because why wouldn't she have called me and asked me about it, or asked me or told me, knowing that I was the best one in the position to help her.
Yeah. And to this day, 14 years later, not quite 14 years later, but just over 13 years later, has Tina ever given you an explanation as to why she didn't let you know earlier, being that you did have a relationship with April?
No, she's never given me an explanation. Okay. And anytime I try to bring the subject up, she quickly changes it.
Okay. What about her school? Did the school, when April didn't show up, of course, the next Monday for school and didn't show up for the next week or the next, ever, did the school not make any inquiries, or do you know anything about that at all?
I know nothing about that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. And are you also saying that there weren't, you found out a year later from something in the news, from somebody who saw something in the news, are you saying then that at the time of the disappearance, November 2006, that there were no articles written at all regarding it at all?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, no, there was nothing written. And I watch TV every day, okay. So I would have seen something.
Okay, so even though this young girl, teenager, went missing, no local media, doesn't sound like Pea Ridge would have any media, but like Fayetteville or some of the bigger cities in Arkansas ever did any stories to your knowledge regarding April's disappearance, at least at the beginning?
At the beginning, no. Nobody did anything.
Okay. Now that you look back at it now, in that first year, being that you didn't know, who did know that she was missing? Who did know?
I'm sorry, you said who did know?
Yeah, being that you didn't know, and there were a lot of people, of course, that didn't know. Some people, a lot of people, including yourself, that I think should have known. Who did know? Of course, Tina knew. The police knew. Who else knew that April was missing?
Maybe just those in the town. Just people like that was in the neighborhood that, was around at the time that, the police showed up, and, they started asking neighbors, have you seen her? I think that's the only people that knew, besides schools and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to this. And being that she was 15 years old, is it your understanding that an Amber Alert was never issued?
There was never an Amber Alert issued, no.
Have you ever gotten an explanation for that any time that you've talked to anybody involved in the case, maybe even somebody in the police department, anybody? Have they ever offered up any explanation? It would seem like this would be one way to use the Amber Alert.
The only explanation I got was they thought she was a runaway and she would be home.
Okay. All right. So you didn't find out for a year. Tina's kind of keeping a lid on it. It seems like only people who are very close to her, maybe even not close to her. It seems like there weren't a lot of people asking a lot of questions, not even school officials, regarding this. Kind of put the word out about April being missing. I know we talked about this before, but I'm going to ask you again. When the police got involved, did they ever find anybody who saw April walking on the street that day by herself or at the church, anywhere?
To my knowledge, the only one that we know of was the 8-year-old little girl.
Okay. And then you also said that this clothing drive seemingly, allegedly never happened.
Right.
How do you know? Being that you don't live there, you don't go to that church, who has told you that this story about a clothing drive being at this church might not be true?
Through detectives that have questioned me and come and talk to me about it.
Okay.
They have mentioned it to me.
Okay. How many times has that happened over the last 13 plus years that the cops have come and talked to you?
At least 4.
Okay. Can you, I would never expect you to say everything that you talked about, but if you can give the listeners and myself maybe kind of a flavor of the questions that they did ask you.
They would ask me about the relationship between April and her mother, the relationship between her brothers and at home, if I felt like April would be a runaway. They would ask me if April has ever contacted me. Just basic questions. They asked me if I knew where I was that day, and that's when I found out I was supposedly there.
Oh.
They then would ask me questions about Tina's personality or her parenting. Ask me questions about kids going to school, if I knew what their schooling was like. Just basic questions. Nothing.
Okay.
They asked me about one guy in general, which was Tina's ex-husband. But to my knowledge, that's about the only questions I could think of they would ask me, or that they did ask me.
Okay. In regards to, once again, they told you that you were over that day. I guess they got that information from Tina?
Right.
Okay, so she's saying you were over there that day, whereas you have no recollection of you being over there at all.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned this earlier. This sighting, this 8-year-old. What did this 8-year-old allegedly see again?
She said that she saw April talking to a gentleman in a tan pickup truck. And it was supposedly an older tan pickup truck.
Okay. Of course, we would never say an 8-year-old's name on the air. Do you have any idea what family this is that this 8-year-old was a part of to even see this?
To my knowledge, she lived so they lived in apartments that, I think it was like 6 or 8 wide, and there was 2 rows of them. They were facing each other. So she lived in the apartments across at the very end by the road.
All right, so this wasn't a sighting that would have happened down near the church. This was a sighting that happened right there in the near the apartment complex. Like,
right.
Maybe in the parking lot of the complex or on the street that goes by, like on the curb.
Right.
Okay. And saw this brown pickup truck, but you don't know what this family's name is. You've never had yourself a chance to talk to them one-on-one, anything like that?
Now, I have spoken to the little girl. I think I spoke to her a couple of years ago.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and it was through via text, and she reached out to me to let me know that everything, that's all she saw. And at 8 years old, she had no reason to lie about it. And of course, she was 8, so she still, when I tried to ask her questions, she had a hard time remembering all of it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And of course, if she was 8 years old then, she's like 22 now. Maybe you talked to her a couple years ago, she'd be like 20 years old.
Right.
Okay. And is she saying she just has this, at least now, this vague recollection? She doesn't remember how long, she was at the window watching April talk to this guy. It's just like a photo, just a flash of a memory.
Right, exactly. All she remembers is looking out the window, seeing April talking to somebody. She does not remember seeing April get into the car or seeing if April walked away. She don't remember any of that.
Okay. And do you know how soon after, maybe she doesn't remember this, maybe your parents would, how soon after April went missing did they come forward? Was it right away? Did they have to wait? I mean, being that it took you a year to find out that she was missing, it then is it possible that this little girl or her parents didn't come forward for a year also, or what?
No, I believe that they talked to the police either that night or the next day.
Okay. All right. So this little girl, 8 years old at the time, looking out the window, and April is allegedly talking to a guy in a brown pickup truck. Do you know if the police took the sighting very seriously? Did they try to track down anybody with a brown pickup truck in the area? Have any knowledge about this at all?
As far as I know, they did not take that seriously because she was so young. But the family, the girl that I was saying that April was hanging out with and was like the ringleader of everybody.
Yeah, yes.
Her family did have a tan pickup truck.
Huh. Well, Could be something, but there are a lot of brown pickup trucks out there. So we just
Right.
don't know, and we also have to remember it's an 8-year-old, so it could be
Right.
that when it's a man, it could have been a 20-year-old. You know, a 20-year-old looks really old to an 8-year-old, so we just don't know. You know, we have to try to see this through an 8-year-old's eyes.
And also at 8 years old, she might have thought she saw April that day, but it could have been the day before she saw
It
April.
could
you
be.
know?
That's totally true. Totally true. Very good point. Very good point. All right. So we have all that going on. We're not sure if we believe the sighting or not. I think this girl's being very genuine. I'm not necessarily saying that she's lying, but like you said, it could have been the day before. Any other people? How did you find out? First of all, maybe we need to go through this. How did you find out about this sighting? The police tell you.
The police told me. They did tell me.
Okay. And when was the first time you remember knowing about it?
Knowing about the pickup truck?
Knowing about this sighting, yes. How long did it take after April's disappearance for you to find out about this sighting?
When the police came and interviewed me, I want to say they interviewed me about 2 years after April went missing. And that's when I found out about it.
Okay. But this is the only sighting. No other, whether it's 8 years old or 18 or 80 years old, no other people have mentioned seeing April that day.
Right. Right.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to this. Let's talk a little bit about Tina herself. Now, being that she was getting government money, there was an issue with April going missing in relation to the benefits that Tina was getting. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
So I found out that after 2 years, April was missing 2 years, and after 2 years, I found out that her mother was still collecting a Social Security check on April. She never reported it to Social Security that April was no longer in the home. She continued to collect that check, and eventually that got cut off.
How did she end up finally get? Do you have any idea how she ended up getting caught or whatever else?
I called Social Security myself and told them.
No, and I know how you have to find out. I don't know if you want to say so, but I have to ask you this, Tanya. You can decide whether you want to answer this or not. How did you find out about Tina still collecting Social Security for April, even though the story was that she ran away? How did you find that out?
To my best of my knowledge, one of her sons had to have said something to me. Somebody said something to me, and that's when I turned around. I just picked up the phone. I didn't think it was right.
Yeah. Okay. But we should know that wasn't just some rumor. That ended up being true.
No, it was true. She actually got cut off of her Social Security for quite a few years until the money that she was drawn off of April was paid back.
And do you think that she eventually found out that you were the one that told on her? I guess she's going to know now, being we're doing this interview. But do you think she already knows?
I think she does know. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that is underhanded, and it's not the first time. You know, we know that there's a lot of Social Security fraud going on out there, not just with parents and kids, but older people who get Social Security in their 60s and 70s. There's a lot of fraud that goes on there as well. Spouses collecting for dead spouses, a lot of funny business going on there. But yeah, that doesn't look very good if Tina was doing that. But she had other kids, and it might have been tough for her to turn down the money. You did tell me something. Did Tina have a boyfriend at the time that was living in the same complex? Did you say that?
Yes. To my knowledge, she had a boyfriend that lived across the street from her in the same apartment complex, and that she might have even had another boyfriend on the side.
Wow.
I know there was one for sure that lived across the street from her in the same apartment complex.
She was a popular lady, I guess. I guess. Okay. And do you know, we're not going to use his name. I don't want to do that. But did you ever meet this boyfriend? Do you know who he is? Would this be a situation where if we did know his name, if we could look him up to see if he had a criminal record, what can you tell the listeners about him without using his name?
I do not know his name, but I do believe that he did have a criminal record because I do believe they told me they looked at him when April went missing.
That would make a lot of sense. That would, of course, make a lot of sense, and it'd be interesting after all these years to see if, in particular, if he had any sexual convictions,
Right.
anything along those lines, which would, of course, certainly catch our attention. So that might be something, Tanya, for you to do if you don't know his name. That if you were to find it out, I myself and my assistants would be more than happy to look into that, for you, because we have the ability to do that. Do you have any idea? Do you know any more about this relationship? Did you know at the time that Tina, had this guy? No.
My knowledge that the last time I saw them, it was just Tina and the kids living in the home, and as far as I could tell, there was no man involved at that time. She had went through quite a few men after she divorced her second husband, and I was happy to see that she had given it a rest for that time, and that she was focusing. I really thought she was trying to focus more on her and her kids at that time.
Okay, so there's this guy that's right there within maybe a couple 100 feet, maybe 300 feet of football field across the street that Tina is having.
About 50 feet.
Yeah, not far away. And of course, I'm sure what's going to come into many people's minds is possible this guy drove a brown pickup truck. That's something that comes to mind. Then maybe the 8-year-old saw April talking to this guy, and it wasn't, totally a stranger. That's something. Okay. Do you know how long this relationship continued after April disappeared, or what?
I do not know. I have no idea. When I spoke to Tina the first time after I found out, my concern wasn't her boyfriend or what she was doing. My concern was, what are we doing? What are you doing? What are the police saying? So I never thought to ask her about a man.
Okay. Of course, this is over 13 years ago. Of course, she had other children that were younger than April, who are now, they'd be, if they were in their early teens, 11, 12, they'd be, in their mid-20s now. Do you know if any of them talk about April's disappearance? What do they say about that time? Have any of them ever thought there was anything suspicious about April's disappearance? Anything like that?
So every time I bring up the subject of April around the two younger boys, they close up. They don't want to talk about it. They become like a closed book and won't even. They will change the subject before they will talk about April's disappearance.
I am not, as the listeners know, I'm not a parent, so I do not have a lot of experience in this area talking to teenagers and, people of that age, either boys or girls. But as a parent yourself, your experience, what does that tell you? What do you think? How do you think that they react to it?
I mean, it surprises me because they are her brothers, and you would think that they won't even talk to the police. I mean, they whenever the police question them about it, it's really hard to talk to them. So it surprises me. Why don't you want to talk about it? Do you know something more than what you already do? Which I don't know that they do. I'm just, I would be right there doing anything and everything I could to help find my sister if I was there that day that it happened.
I guess what I'm saying is, being that you know these children, I don't know these children. I'm guessing that you're going to have people in your family or friends that are going to listen to this interview maybe that have chance
to meet these kids once in a while, but 99.9% of the audience has not met these children. I guess what I'm asking is this their normal behavior and your interaction with them, or would you say that this is how they are when asked about things? They're kind of tight-lipped. Like you said, April was shy. Do you think this is just a factor of them being shy, or is it something else?
Not these two boys. You can talk to them about anything under the sun. When they come over, they were just here at Christmas time, and we had the best time. We talked about everything under the sun, except for April.
Okay. And and we have to remember, it also could be a factor because you did say that not only did April have a learning disability, but maybe some of the other children did too. Do you think that could factor into their not wanting to talk about it, or not?
Oh, no. So the two youngest ones are the only two that don't have the disability, and April and the other three older ones are the ones with disabilities.
Okay. All right. So the kids are tight-lipped even into their 20s, and you didn't find out about this for a year, so there's not a lot of information coming from the people who lived under that roof at the time.
Right.
Okay. And in fact, it gets me wondering, being that she was so tight-lipped, that it's almost amazing to me that there was a news article at all about the disappearance, being that you found out that way or from somebody who finally saw it and told you about it. It's kind of amazing to me that there was anything written or broadcast about April's disappearance.
And to my awareness, the only time that there's an interview or that anything is when they come to me and they interview me or they talk to me. I've never once seen an interview between April's mom and news or police or anything like that. Not once.
Okay. What has gone on over the last, what has Tina done over the last 13 plus years? After April disappears, of course she's not telling anybody about it. What does she do, for the next decade?
She actually, at one point, her and the two younger boys, they all disappeared. Nobody knew where they were. We finally found them at the Salvation Army. I actually got custody of one of the boys, and they just they stopped talking to police, and the police don't even know how to get a hold of her. Don't even know where she lives. So, at one point they drained a pond, thinking that April was in there, and they were trying to find Tina to tell her what was going on. And me and my son had to drive the streets of Rogers and find her to let her know what was going on.
And did you find her?
Yeah, my son found her sitting on a front porch smoking a cigarette.
Wow. All right. What is Tina doing right now in early 2020? Just so everybody knows, the listeners, and for anybody listens to this interview somewhere down the road, we did this interview on March 1st, 2020. What is Tina doing with her life now?
She's living with a family in Rogers with her son, her older son, and living off her son's disability.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to this, being that we've mentioned it a couple times. And I'm not saying that this has anything to do with the disappearance, but being that we do cover disappearances, we have to talk about it. Let's talk about the first investigator on this case. Her name was Cyrilla Doyle, Cerilla Doyle, Doyle. What can you tell the listeners about her? Did you ever have a chance, first of all, to meet her in person?
No, I never had a chance to meet her in person. But that officer, a year after my sister went missing, this officer also went missing. They have recently found her, I think in the last year, they did find her remains in another state.
That's right.
They don't believe it has anything to do with April's disappearance. But, yeah, like I said, a year after April went missing, she went missing.
Okay.
And I believe that's the news article I heard about where April was missing, because they had done the investigation on her.
All right. So what you're saying is if Cyrilla Doyle hadn't gone missing, there might not have been any articles about April's disappearance.
Right.
Wow. Yes, and you're right. Cyrilla Doyle was her remains were found in another state. I've tried to read up on it. I don't know if it was Iowa or Missouri, but it wasn't in Arkansas. And it's not believed to be foul play. However, what I've read is they never have discovered, how she got there or anything like that. So, although she's been found, it's still a little mystery. There are still some details about this investigator's disappearance that nobody knows. Okay, it's a weird connection, and I remember Cyrilla Doyle's, her remains being found a few years ago. I remember that story, and little did I know I would be covering a disappearance where she was involved. Okay. What's this been like for you, being that I'm just going to call you the de facto spokesman or spokesperson for April's disappearance? What's the last 13, well, not 13 because you didn't find out till 2007, 12 plus years been like for you, Tanya?
It's been horrible because there's two, her birthday is also my daughter's birthday, so that's not a birthday I can forget. I can't just put her out of my mind. So, I can always celebrate my daughter, but then I always mourn my sister. And the day of her disappearance is my mother's birthday. So, again, it's the same factor. It's horrible. I go, every time I hear remains have been found, every time I hear something about sex trafficking, girls have been saved, I pray that somewhere in there I get some kind of answers for April. But, and again, I never do. I always keep that hope that somewhere out there I'm going to get that answer.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm sure it affects you with your own children as well. Being very protective of them. I mean, I don't know how old all of them are, and it's probably none of my business, but you probably, once you found out about April's disappearance, you became much more protective of your own.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, my oldest one's birthday is today, and she's 30 years old today, but to this day, if she does not call me back, or if, any of my kids, if they don't call me back within a certain amount of time, I start panicking. Are they okay? I always think the worst now. And I never used to be like that.
Yeah. Do you tell, being that your kids might have been too young, or maybe you have a 30-year-old now, so she would have been old enough? Do you tell maybe some of your younger children about April and memories of her, so they know, so they don't forget about her?
Oh yes, all my kids know about April. April's everywhere in my house. I've got photo albums. I got pictures. They all know who April is. But like I said, my kids are the same age as my brothers, so they all, they grew up knowing April. As to them, it wasn't like their aunt and uncle. To them, it was their cousins.
Yeah. Now we have to remember that you and April shared a father. I'm not here to dig, but is your father still alive? Did he take any concern in this at all? Anything?
My father passed away in 2002.
All right, so he passed away before this ever happened.
Right.
Right, okay. How did other people, maybe other adult family members, when they found out that April was missing, and how did that affect them?
They were livid because they weren't contacted. Nobody contacted us. If we would have known, there could have been a better chance that we could have found her.
Yep.
And we could have gathered together and gone up there and helped and done whatever we could. But my brothers, my two older brothers, and even aunts and uncles that live here in this state, none of us knew. And they were so upset because why wouldn't you reach out to families? That's who you reach out to in times like this.
When was the last time you spoke to, you said it was a sheriff's office now that's in charge? Sheriff's office?
Right. I actually spoke to them a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And they said they do have new leads, and they're getting very close. They cannot give me details.
Is that right?
Yeah, but they said they do have new leads. They are working the case every day, and they're getting close to answers.
Wow. Well, for a case that's 13 and 4 months old, yeah, that's about right. 14 years, 3.5 months old. To hear that they're telling you that is encouraging. I'm not sure if I believe it, but it's nice that they're saying it.
Right, because before they would never say anything like that. Before they would be like, we're still looking into it. We don't have any leaks. We're interviewing this person or this person. And then they said that, and he goes, I don't want to get your hopes up because I don't think we're going to bring her home, but we are getting close to answers.
And I guess by this time, all these years later, once again, you are like the point person now. Do they even try to even find Tina anymore?
When I spoke to them the other day, I asked them that if Tina was involved in the case at all, and they said no, she was not.
Well, that's certainly telling. Okay. Do you have a Facebook page and anything like that set up for April?
Yes, it's called Helpline April Dawn Andrews, and it's on Facebook.
Okay. And are you one of the administrators there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Great. And how long have you had that page set up?
I believe my daughter set it up the first year we found out.
Wow, so it's a pretty old page then.
Yes.
Yeah, because Facebook, I think, just kind of became a thing around 2000, the way I remember 2006, something like that.
Yeah.
Of course there was MySpace, and then Facebook kind of took over, and of course it's still a big thing. So very early on is when you got that page made. That's interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, I will make sure that by this time people hear our voices. I will make sure to have linked to it so all the listeners know about it, and they can like it and share it and find out everything that's going on there. Tanya, any last words before we complete this interview?
No, I just would appreciate it if people would, like you said, go on to April's Facebook page and like her page. Spread the word. Share her page. I will put anybody on there if we can get the word out. That'd be great. Okay.
We'll make sure that happens. Okay. Tanya, I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
You're very welcome.
And that was my interview with Tanya Washburn, half-sister of April Andrews. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. As I stated before the interview, within April's disappearance, you can see all the examples of why I shy away from child disappearances, and why I've instructed Emily, my assistant whose main responsibility is to find disappearances to feature, why I've told her to not actively pursue them. Now, if a family approaches us, then of course, we'll talk to anybody. But unless we can be sure that the person who will be the guest cannot be connected to the child's disappearance in any way, then we just won't do it. Why? Because the FBI stats say parents are usually responsible for the disappearances of their own children, either through murder or custodial kidnapping or sex trafficking. Those are the facts. And I don't want to ever let it happen that a person who we have on the program ends up being the person who is proven to have caused the disappearance. That would be bad. And child's cases are the ones where that most likely can happen. So in talking to April's half-sister, Emily and I thought it was the safest way to cover this particular disappearance. So, what are the general examples of what makes us leery about covering child cases, and how do they apply to April's? Number one, In child disappearances, many times one of the parents behaves oddly after the fact. In April's, her mother didn't tell anyone, even within her own family, that April was missing. In addition, April's mother didn't get any media attention for her daughter's disappearance. Number 2, in child disappearances, my perception is that there is often a new boyfriend or stepfather or someone like that on the scene. And because of that, it makes us believe the parent may be covering for the new squeeze. In April's, Tina's new man, or at least one of them, lived in the same complex as the family. Number 3, in child disappearances, and certainly more than in adult ones, the actual details of the disappearance are not very concise. In April's, the story is that she went to a church for a clothing giveaway. But to hear Tanya tell it, there was nothing like that happening at the church that day. Having said all that, that doesn't mean April's mother or her new man had anything to do with April's disappearance. I am just giving you reasons we don't cover child disappearances a lot, and how those principles could have been applied to April's disappearance had we decided not to feature it. In fact, we can look at it this way. April's case is very much like Jacob Wetterling's, and although suspicions came from all angles, we now know no one in Jacob's family had anything to do with his disappearance and death. Unfortunately, and sadly, he had a random encounter with a very bad guy. So it's possible April did too. I'm just happy we could find someone who is impartial, above reproach, but who is also knowledgeable about April, that being Tanya. In many children's cases, you don't find someone like that. I think what I'm saying, and this goes along with the theme for this episode, is that we as adults, even though we cherish the innocence of children, and we wish we could look at the world through their eyes, we can't be naive when child disappearances are concerned. We can't be like, oh, a parent would never do this, or that's just too horrible to be true, or that stepmother or stepfather loved that child. He or she would never do anything. No, we must be suspicious and doubtful and cynical of anyone who could have encountered a child on the disappearance date. That is the safe thing to do. That is the healthy thing to do. And that's the only way these disappearances will be solved. However, I will say this. I am inclined to believe the 8-year-old and what she saw that day. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.